It all started on a bright morning when the village was alive with activity. Women pounded yam in wooden mortars, the rhythmic sound echoing across the fields. Children played by the river, their laughter filling the air. I was weaving a basket near my family's hut when I first noticed Oma. She was carrying her grandmother's calabash, a beautifully carved heirloom passed down for generations. Everyone in the village admired it, not just for its beauty but for what it represented. Grandmother always said, "The calabash holds more than water, it carries the weight of our ancestors' blessings." Oma, however, seemed distracted that day. Oma was supposed to fetch water from the river like she always did. She usually took her time, careful not to let anything happen to the calabash. But that morning, her friends had planned a game of hide-and-seek in the nearby mango grove. I saw her hesitate at the edge of the river. She looked at the calabash, then at her friends laughing in the distance. I called out, "Oma, be careful. The river is slippery after last night's rain." She waved me off. "It's just water, Ekwa. I'll be quick." Her words made me uneasy. Something didn't feel right. Oma balanced carefully on the rocks by the river's edge. The water was clear, reflecting the morning sun, and she leaned over to fill the calabash. That's when it happened. Her foot slipped on the moss-covered rock. I watched in horror as the calabash tumbled from her hands, hitting the sharp stones below. The sound of the calabash breaking was sharp, like a crack of thunder. Oma froze, staring at the jagged pieces scattered around her. I ran to her side. "Oma, are you okay?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were wide with fear as she whispered, "What have I done?" By the time we returned to the village, Oma's grandmother was already waiting. It was as if she had sensed something was wrong. Grandmother looked at the broken pieces in Oma's hands and sighed deeply. "Child, this calabash is more than a vessel. Its breaking signals trouble for our family." The words sent a chill through the crowd that had gathered. The villagers murmured, their faces filled with concern. "Trouble?" I asked nervously. Grandmother nodded. "Oma must make amends. This is a test of her character. If she does not set things right, the blessings we rely on may fade away." That evening, Grandmother handed Oma a woven basket and whispered instructions. "You must go to the elders' grove by dawn and gather water from the sacred spring. Only this water can restore the blessings. But the journey will not be easy." I followed Oma to her hut. "Oma, you can't do this alone. Let me come with you." She shook her head. "No, Ekwa. Grandmother said this is my responsibility." "But what if something happens?" I asked, worried. Oma gave a small, sad smile. "Then I will face it, like the stories say our ancestors did." The next morning, I couldn't help myself. I followed Oma from a distance, my curiosity outweighing my fear. The path to the sacred spring was treacherous. Oma had to climb steep hills, cross narrow bridges, and wade through muddy trails. At one point, a snake slithered across her path, and I held my breath as she froze in place, waiting for it to pass. She reached the sacred spring just as the sun began to rise. The spring was nestled in a grove of ancient trees, their roots twisting like giant hands. Oma knelt by the water and filled her basket, her movements careful and deliberate. As Oma began her journey back, the challenges only grew harder. Rain clouds gathered overhead, and the path turned slippery and dangerous. At one point, a gust of wind nearly knocked the basket from her hands, but she clung to it tightly. I stayed hidden, watching her struggle. Something about her determination moved me deeply. She wasn't just carrying water, she was carrying hope. Just as Oma reached the edge of the village, she encountered a group of children playing near the path. One of them, a little boy, tripped and fell into the mud, crying loudly. Oma hesitated. She was so close to home, but she couldn't ignore the boy's cries. She set down the basket carefully and helped him up, wiping the mud from his face. As she turned back to the basket, I saw her gasp. The water had started to spill. I rushed to her side. "Oma, what do we do now?" She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I'll have to go back," she said. When Oma finally returned to the village, exhausted and drenched from the rain, the elders were waiting. Grandmother stepped forward, her face unreadable. "Did you bring the water?" she asked. Oma nodded and handed her the basket, now only half full. She bowed her head. "I tried, Grandmother. But I had to help someone along the way." For a moment, there was silence. Then Grandmother smiled, a rare, warm smile. "You have passed the test, Oma," she said. "The journey was never about the water. It was about your heart. You showed kindness, courage, and humility. These are the true blessings." The villagers gathered around as Grandmother poured the remaining water into the broken calabash. To everyone's amazement, the pieces fused together, the cracks disappearing as if they had never been. I stood there, awestruck. That day, I learned a lesson as powerful as Oma did. Life isn't about perfection or avoiding mistakes. It's about how we respond, the sacrifices we make, and the kindness we show along the way. From that day on, Oma was no longer just the girl with the beautiful calabash. She became a symbol of resilience and compassion in our village. And as for me, I never forgot the sound of that calabash breaking or the way it brought out the best in someone I thought I knew so well.